Next, we'll talk about important things to consider while you're away. There are some important things to think about regarding your arrival in country. The first is managing the first 24 hours. Setting your watch ahead and adjusting to the local time before you even depart can really help reduce jet lag. Having an arrival plan is important in case things don't go as planned. If you're planning on checking into a specific place, say a dormitory upon your arrival, it's smart to have an idea of where you'll go in case your plane is late. Also, think about getting access to local currency in the form of cash before you go, or at least a plan of how you'll get it once you arrive. Staying in touch with friends and loved ones is an important consideration for every student. First, figure out how you'll communicate your arrival. We suggest you give yourself 72 hours, get yourself settled, and then figure out how you'll get in touch. It's important that you update your contact information on the Study Abroad account with your local address and phone number abroad. This will help us keep in touch with you in case there's an emergency. It's also important that you set expectations about how you'll keep in touch with your friends and loved ones while you're away. We suggest that you blog. It allows you to update everyone at once with the exciting things happening in your life, saving you more time for enjoying the experience. You can even blog for us at UW Study Abroad. Check with your Study Abroad advisor for more information. Next, we'll discuss matters of student responsibility, health, and safety. Almost everyone on the Study Abroad program at the UW is a member of a learning community of some variety. We'd like you to spend some time considering what your contribution to that community will be. Will you encourage others to engage with the local community? Will you be an ambassador for the University of Washington in Seattle? Or will your actions have a diminishing effect on those around you, reducing everyone's opportunity for immersion and reflection? Your actions and attitude will be the most determinative aspect of whether you have a good or a great experience. Be sure to attend the specific orientation for your program, in person if possible, to learn more about your learning community. If you're unsure of the details for that specific orientation, check with your Study Abroad advisor. Sexual health abroad is a complicated issue. Depending on your destination, you may find that your perceptions of boundaries and what is culturally appropriate are tested. Remember that sexually transmitted infections are present in every country in the world, but condoms are not. So be sure to plan accordingly. If you are the victim of a sexual assault, remember that you have resources available to you even while you're away, the most important of which is your local coordinator or program director. The UW resources listed here can also help you figure out where to go and what to do next. Remember, if you are a U.S. citizen, every U.S. embassy abroad has someone on staff who handles sexual assault. The message we'd like to convey to you regarding alcohol and drugs abroad is one of responsibility. Responsibility to your learning community, yourself, and the culture that you're visiting. Remember that the country or countries you'll be engaging with may have very different attitudes about the consumption of alcohol, and we want you to be respectful of those attitudes. You'll likely find that your new environment will have an impact on your tolerance as well, so if you choose to drink, please do so responsibly. Laws regarding alcohol, and specifically drugs, can be very different in other parts of the world, and the University of Washington cannot do anything to help you if you find yourself confronted by these laws, so be responsible. There are a handful of behavioral expectations while you're away that are important to remember. The first is that the UW Code of Conduct applies to you even while you're out of the country. If you haven't read it before, or it's been a while, it may be worth revisiting. Your program or exchange may have its own specific rules regarding conduct. Check in with your program director or coordinator to find out. Remember once again that the laws of the host country you're in apply to you even if you don't know what those laws are, and that the UW can do little to assist you. In this section, we have tried to encapsulate important hazards to be conscious of while you're abroad. The first is traffic. More study abroad students are injured in traffic accidents than by anything else, most commonly because traffic laws are very different throughout the world, and in many cases can seem non-existent. If you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, learn by observing the locals and be careful. Fire safety is not something very many students are conscious of, but can be deadly. Be aware that fire safety and building codes in general may be very different from your expectations, and not something you're accustomed to having to think about. If you're renting an apartment, look for things like smoke alarms and fire escapes before choosing. While violent crime is not common on study abroad programs, it pays to be careful. Students abroad are often easy to spot and targets for petty thievery. Major public transportation systems are the most common site for this kind of crime, but check with local friends or your program director or coordinator to learn about places to avoid. Next, we'll learn about how to handle an emergency. It's important to begin by defining what an emergency is exactly. An emergency is any situation which poses an immediate or potential risk to the safety, security, or health of a UW student, faculty, or staff. But often it's more important to talk about what isn't an emergency. While losing your passport or being pickpocketed are certainly unfortunate, they wouldn't constitute an emergency in this case. What exactly should you do in an emergency? It depends a little on your situation. Most importantly is the local emergency number in the country where you are located, as we discussed earlier. Look it up, write it down, and memorize it. If you've been injured, or there's a fire, for example, this is the first thing to do.
The number for On-Call International is also important to have on hand once you're out of danger.
The UW International Emergency phone line is listed here, but it's unlikely you'll have a need for it. Most often, it's a way to coordinate those affected by an emergency situation and those who can help to solve it. And lastly, knowing the number for your embassy located in your host country is important as well.
Now we'll talk about exactly how the insurance program works while you're away. In the best case, if you need to visit a medical professional for something that isn't an emergency, give a call to On-Call International, and they'll help to coordinate a healthcare facility that fits your needs, as well as the payment for those services. If you find yourself in an emergency, where you need to visit the nearest hospital, you may need to pay out of pocket initially, then file a claim online, and you'll be reimbursed as quickly as possible.
Next, we'll talk about some important cultural considerations. While we hope that you find this information valuable, there is no way that we can cover all of the important cultural factors that will be a part of your study abroad experience in this short time. We encourage you to do some research on your own and to check in with your study abroad advisor and your program director to learn more. You'll be glad you did. We'd like to begin our conversation about culture with an understanding that the cultural frameworks you may encounter could potentially shape your experience in unanticipated ways. The traditions and value systems that make a society different from your own can be shocking if you are unprepared. These frameworks are manifest in things like gender roles, or more collectivist attitudes versus the value we place on individuality in the United States, to name just a few examples. You might find that some cultures place less value on being on time than you are used to cite another example. Remember that you're going abroad to encounter difference, so when you do encounter it, embrace it and learn from it. One way that you can help to prepare yourself for these potential differences is to explore some of the intensity factors that may be prevalent in your program. What we mean by these intensity factors are the things that are likely to make your experience more or less intense. Are you going to be in a language-intensive setting where your communication skills in another language will be put to the test? How much experience do you have in dealing with difference? Will you be very isolated from others from your home culture? Will you have more or less power due to your nationality, status, or language ability? These are just a few of the things we'd like to encourage you to think about both before you go and while you're away. Issues of power, privilege, and ethical engagement with communities abroad is of paramount importance to the University of Washington, and your participation in that ethic is vital. If you're interested in this subject or other social justice topics that might be a part of your program, ask your study abroad advisor for resources. Your ability to reflect on these kinds of experiences will have an impact on how culturally competent you become upon your return. Nonverbal communication is one of the most frustrating and often amusing components of encountering another culture. The way that you present yourself and dress can have a significant impact on how locals perceive you. Gestures, expressions, and body language are not the same the world over. A thumbs up for approval may express an entirely different sentiment in certain parts of the world. Remember that personal space is a cultural value as well. You may encounter situations in this regard that test your comfort zone. Social behavior can also be disparate from your expectations. Learn by observing locals to determine what's appropriate. I'll give you a moment to look briefly at this political cartoon. It expresses something inherent in stereotypes, and that is perspective. Your vantage point might change your perception of something entirely. This is exactly why stereotypes are one of the most fascinating things to encounter on your study abroad experience. You'll never get as good of a chance to break down your own stereotypes of others, and stereotypes others may have of you, than by giving yourself the opportunity to glimpse at how others see the world. Every student comes to their study abroad experience with a completely different background, set of experiences, and attitude that it's impossible to say just how your experience will go. Suffice it to say that many students experience extreme highs and lows while they are abroad, and this is entirely normal. Here are a few strategies for helping to adapt to those highs and lows. Managing your expectations can have a remarkable impact on your attitude and perception abroad. A sense of humor will go a long way towards making some of those awkward moments into amusing memories. Flexibility will help you to adapt to ever-present changes that you encounter. If you're a language student, no skill is more important than your willingness to make mistakes. And once again, learn by observing locals. Take a moment to watch how others are behaving, and you'll feel a lot more confident. Getting involved is one of the best ways to meet locals while you're away, particularly if you're going abroad in a learning community on a UW program. Think about joining a sports team or a club. Become a language partner for someone hoping to learn English while you improve your language skills at the same time. And become a regular. Buy bread from the local bakery or coffee at a local cafe and get a glimpse of how locals live. There is a lot of really important academic information to take into account while you're abroad. The first is SNS requests. Just like here at the UW, you can request to assign satisfactory or non-satisfactory to a specific course. It cannot be a degree requirement, so be sure to check in with your academic advisor before you make the request. And remember that this request must go through the Study Abroad office. You'll find a request form on our website. Different programs have different deadlines for SNS requests, so be sure to get yours in before the deadline. Courses assigned SNS will not be factored into your GPA. What we mean by educational plan is that you consider that whatever you do abroad has an impact back here at the UW. Regardless of what kind of program you'll be participating in, before you make any changes to your schedule or academic plan, be sure that you're aware of the consequences. When in doubt, check in with your academic advisor. If you are participating in a direct or departmental exchange or affiliated program, make sure that you have your transcripts sent to us. We cannot begin the process of evaluation without something to evaluate. Keep your course materials if you are receiving a foreign transcript. The relevant department may need those materials to determine course equivalencies. Remember that many places in the world have very different sets of classroom expectations regarding dress or attendance, so be aware. There is a conversion scale for every country that we send students to with respect to both credits and grades, so ask your study abroad advisor if that scale is not already on your study abroad account. Lastly, remember that all of your grades and credits will factor into your GPA, regardless of the final mark or need for credit. Before we move on to the next section, complete the questions in the quiz below, and then start the next video.